Alrighty, folks, thank you for tuning in to another author interview with the High Fantasy Podcast. This is Morgan and Shalini on camera again, and we have our author, Mr. Tim Frankovich, with us here today. Tim, thank you for coming on to the podcast.
Thanks a lot. Glad to be here.
Sweet. Okay, so Tim Frankovich has been exploring fantastic worlds since third grade, when he cut up a grocery sack and drew a Godzilla meets superhero story. Since then, he's gotten a little bit better at the writing part, but not so much at the drawing. He is the author of the Heart of Fire series, and his latest release in April 2020 is titled Until All Bonds Are Broken. His goal as a writer is to transport readers to another world, make them care deeply about characters in dire situations, and guide them deeper into life itself. That was a wonderful, wonderful bio. That was great. Yeah. I definitely identify a lot with third grader tearing things up and drawing haphazardly on any material I can get my hands on, because that was definitely me. It's your cereal boxes.
I saw in one of your earlier ones that you mentioned making your own little comic books when you were younger. Yeah.
Drew, yeah.
I did a ton of those.
yeah. It's fun times. Anyway, thanks again, Tim, and just please describe a bit more about yourself and the series Heart of Fire.
Okay. Well, like I said, I've been wanting to be a writer for most of my life, and it's only within the last few years that I finally got anywhere with it. Got put on the side for years and years, and now finally came back to it and actually started getting some books done. And, I live in Texas. I'm a husband, father, graphic designer, quarantined, all that good stuff. Yeah. Sitting at home waiting for something to happen. That's life right now.
Yeah, I know. For a lot of us, and I definitely, the part that I'm identifying a lot with, and I want to kind of prod you on, is guiding your readers deeper into life itself. And I think, especially right now with everything that's going on in the world, it's, I think, a good time for self-reflection and for us to kind of question our values, what we care about, what really matters to us. And I think that fantasy, definitely for me and for Shalini as well, it's been pretty huge in getting us through tough times. So, yeah.
My books, the current fantasy series that I've got going right now, is primarily about two main characters. Marshall, who is he was born with a curse, and in this world, there are no police, no law enforcement of any kind. Everything's enforced by magic. If you break any of the major laws, murder, rape, something like that, doing harm to another person, then immediately you're hit with a magical curse. Unless you're one of the lords of the land who manage to exempt themselves from it, so that they do something wrong, the curse falls on one of their children. And so Marshall is the illegitimate son of one of those lords, and he was born with this curse and just wants to get out of it. And so it sets off this, adventure quest thing, whatever you want to call it, as he and his mother and a friend who's kind of dragged into it, doesn't want to be there, to get rid of, first of all, his quest, but then hopefully in the end to get rid of the entire system, to break it all down because it's unfair. And the other character is Sari, who is in training to be a mage. She wants to, each one of the 6 lands of Antisus, the area that the story's about, have a master mage, the greatest mage of the land. She wants to be the first female master mage. And so she's really into that. But as soon as she arrives at the island where mages are trained, there's an earthquake, and it's only the beginning of things getting really bad because the whole magic system is breaking up and causing damage to the land itself. And she has to try to figure out what's going on with all that. So that's the basis of the two main characters, what's going on in their story.
Yeah, sounds fairly chaotic.
Yeah,
a little
bit. A lot going on. Yeah, I love stories where it balances the magic and the fantasy realm, so it seems like Sari is like that side of things, but then with Marshall, it's a bit more of the politics and the grittier reality of stories. Do you write in a single genre? Like what type of genre, or do you do genre bending in your work?
Cross-pollination, like they call it.
Well, I've always loved fantasy from the very beginning, and that's my primary focus. I do have a cross-genre book that I'm working on. Well, I wrote one a few years ago, and I'm now, after doing the epic fantasy stuff, I'm going back to it and rewriting it. It's a beginning of a young adult series that's kind of a blend of sci-fi and fantasy, because it has dragons, but they also have cybernetic parts, so, you know.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool to see the genre bending and how different genres feed well into each other. Like sci-fi and fantasy are always pretty well knit together, because you can go like really crazy with magic systems and make it almost seem like a science, and then you can, you know, have a prehistoric sort of civilization with sort of magic elements, and it actually ends up being like a science instead. So there's a lot of bending there that you can play around with.
Yeah, it's getting harder and harder to nail something down as this is just fantasy, or this is just sci-fi, or, you know, whatever, horror, anything.
Yeah, absolutely. I think at the heart of all of them, though, is the characters. And I saw online that you got a lot of great reviews on how you build your characters and how readers feel really deeply towards them. So Marshall is a protagonist who cannot communicate beyond a simple yes or no, and even that if you can only remember the signs. So what prompted you to write such a unique character, and what did you want readers to get out of reading and sympathizing with such a character?
Well, the story behind it was when I was brainstorming the series, and you know, I knew who Marshall was, I knew his backstory, his heritage, and all that kind of thing, and I knew he would have a curse. I had not figured out at first what that curse was going to be, and it would have to be something significant. And the first thing that popped into my head was blindness, and I thought, no. I'm not going to write an entire story from the point of view of somebody who can't see. That's a little bit much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's, you know, I'm sure it can be done, but not by me and not right now.
Right.
So that would be a very difficult thing to pull off. The next thing that occurred to me was muteness, being unable to speak. And I was thinking, okay, that could work. It would be a challenge to write, which I wanted a challenge. I wanted to be able to stretch myself as a writer. But then the more I thought about it, the more I wrote a couple of opening scenes just to practice with it and see what it was like. And I realized I needed to take it further than that, more than just that he couldn't speak, but that the curse, since it was magical, that he could not really communicate. So there's references to his mother at times that tried to teach him sign language, but he was unable to grasp it. You know, she would show him something and he would try to repeat it and it would just fade out of his mind. He couldn't grasp it. So, you know, the most he could do was yes and no, nodding and shaking his head. And the only way he could do that is she had a sign posted in their little home. You know, it says nod is yes, shake is no. You know, and constantly remind himself of that just to be able to do that. And so, you know, I wanted it to be something that people would sympathize with, in the sense of there's something bad happening with this character. You know, you want to feel sorry for him and everything. And I was really, really gratified about that when I first posted the first chapter online on my website, when a friend of mine who was born with a deformity read it and immediately responded with, "That's exactly how I grew up. That's how I felt all the time," you know.
Yeah.
And in a sense, it's something that anybody can identify with, not in the sense of, you know, that you had a magical curse on your life or something, but the idea of being a loner, being picked on by other people and stuff. You know, we all have had that at some point in our life. You know, when I was in junior high, I got picked on.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
same here. Yeah.
So, so that's something that's kind of universal.
Mm-hmm.
And having characters with flaws, with things that they struggle with, is, I think, a key to good stories. I mean, even when you have, characters that have some great ability in one way, they need to be balanced in another way. I mean, one of the best examples of that is Sherlock Holmes.
Mm.
He's absolutely brilliant in most ways, but, his personality is horrible.
Yeah.
Wrote about that in, the Sherlock series on BBC now, showing, what an absolute jerk he is, but, he's brilliant.
Yeah.
And those are the characters, we want our characters to have flaws because we do, and so.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I think that there's that old trope. It's common in a lot of fantasy that we actually like, where the characters don't really have anything that's like really wrong with them. Maybe there's some struggle that they have to overcome, but it's external to them. And then, if they're the hyper competent, almost superhero level in terms of their abilities, it kind of makes it seem like, oh, well, it's just Hercules. Like, who cares?
Yeah.
But I think these days we want to know what's in his head or her head. What's, like, what was their childhood like, maybe, or, like, what is their biggest weakness? What kind of gets under their skin?
Yeah, I was going to ask, what was the writing process like for creating a character who can't communicate, or conceive of that sort of thing? Especially, I was struck by a book, which is, it's a piece of communication and plot and dialogue, and so the whole business of storytelling involves communication, and to drive the story forward, you need that. So what was it like creating that character, and did you have someone else read it over, like similar to your friend, reading after the fact and getting a good response from that?
I had some early readers, and one person even a couple people pointed out early on that in some of the earlier drafts it sounded a lot like autism to some degree, some levels of autism, which had not occurred to me at all when I was starting it. And so that made me think about it a bit, because I didn't want to, you never want to diminish a real world problem by having a magical solution to it, And so
Right, yeah.
I had to, go through there and make sure I repeatedly communicated that his problem was caused by magic, and that it was not, not a genetic deficiency or anything like that. It was just something that he had been magically cursed with, and so the solution would have to be magic. But yeah, writing it, like I said, it was a challenge, because your main character is supposed to talk, and express his feelings to other people around him and things like that. And so I had to, just sit there and think about, okay, he can't talk, he can't communicate. How does, I can talk about, and it's, it's deeply from his point of view, what he's thinking and everything, but at the same time, he's locked in himself. He can't tell other people what he's thinking. And so sometimes he may, when he reacts angrily or something, other people have no earthly idea what's going on.
Right.
And so it's, it was a challenge. I think one of the bigger challenges I'm having now, moving on, is, okay, as he moves on into his life after this, what effect has this had on him overall? Well, how does that shape his personality, how he thinks about things? And one of the things I thought of was, one of the main ways that we grow as people and develop our own beliefs and philosophies and stuff is by communication, by talking to other people, arguing with other people, hearing their point of view and everything. And he's never had that. So that kind of person would be very set in their own beliefs, because they've never had anybody really challenge them.
Right.
So I had to consider how that would affect him as well.
Yeah, I really love when magic reveals different parts of the human experience. So the fact that this curse stops him from communicating, what does that kind of tell us about the need for communication and society with other people, especially now with quarantine? It's kind of like, oh, like you're in your own world a lot and you're very isolated. And only when you go outside and you meet a friend that you realize, like, oh, there's more to life than me just like, sitting, eating, working, reading, going to bed.
Rinse and repeat.
Yeah. It's quite incredible when authors can really dive deep into those things, and it's not just the magic facade, so to speak. There's something a bit more to say. So you've described yourself as a lifelong Tolkien fan in our communications, and we'll definitely get into that soon. But I was going to ask, what was the process like from being a fan of reading fantasy, and you said you made the switch over to being a writer in these past few years. So what's been that switch like from a fan of reading fantasy to breaking into the scene of fantasy writing?
It's been a lot of fun. My shelves are full of fantasy novels. Old Tolkien books over on the corner over here.
Awesome.
But like I said, I did do some writing early on in life, and just, little comic books, and then actually, a little bit later, I actually got saved up a few bucks, went to a pawn shop and bought an old typewriter and taught myself to type, and just so I could write down stories. Mm-hmm. And virtually all of those were like super derivative of, Narnia or Star Wars or something like that,
Yeah.
So, but I had the desire from the very beginning, even to the point, when I went to college, I majored in communications and writing, but, as I was getting near the end of college, I realized, I'm not going to get a job in writing stories right away. So right. I had to shift to graphic design, and that became my job. I got married, had kids, and all the writing just kind of got put to the side. I didn't really do much. Did some stuff for my church and a few other things here and there, but nothing major. Until just in the last few years, I'd spent a lot of time reviewing books, and so reading more and more. And then I decided, I've got all these ideas. I should write some. Mm. And then I ran across the NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month, in November a few years ago. And I thought, okay, here's a challenge. I like challenges, so I'll take this on, see what I can do. And I had the idea with the cybernetic dragons, and so I ran with that and wrote almost an entire novel in that month, and finished it up a couple months later, and realized I can do this. I really can. And so that was a big revelation. Not so much a revelation as a reminder that I could do this and that I had these ideas. And I tried shopping that one around to literary agents and never got anywhere with it. And so I set it aside and decided to work on fantasy, which was my first love. And so I spent a long time brainstorming, figuring out what I was going to do and how it was going to work, and then started writing. Hired an editor, did all that kind of stuff, and I did shop it around a bit, but couldn't make any headway with the agents. So decided that finally to go with the self-publishing route, which, there are benefits and negative things about either way you go with publishing these days. So, but now I'm pretty happy with doing it this way. Mm. I have more control over it, for one thing. It's very, very hard to really break into things because there is so much out there now.
Yeah.
I mean, anybody can type something up, slap a cover on it, and sell it on Amazon at any point they want. But to actually make a book that is quality and, that can that from my point of view can sit on the shelves at Barnes & Noble with any other books and be just as good is takes a lot of work. I think that's the biggest thing I learned was how much work happens after you finish the story.
Right. For sure.
You have to rewrite, you have to edit, you have to proofread, I mean, so many different things. And it's been a big journey, but it's still just, in many ways, it's still just getting started. I have 2 books out. I hope to have 2 more by the end of the year. But even that is very little. You know, if you want to actually make it anywhere, you know, self-publishing right now, you have to have a whole bunch of books out. so it'll take a while, but I'm enjoying it.
Yeah. I think for sure the idea of having a bit more control over like what you can do with your creative processes is a pretty big thing for us too. Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of the allure as well. I think I definitely agree that things in traditional publishing seem very gated and very difficult. It's like a very hard institution to kind of get into, if that makes sense. But yeah, there is that other challenge of is, you know, the worry of, is my work going to be another one of those ones on Amazon that, you know, it's just never picked up. And I think that's the other cool part, is it makes us think about what comes after, because for us, or at least for me, I'm like, I just want to finish this darn book and like have something to work with, and then I know and acknowledge that afterward is where the real bulk of it is, because it's the marketing, it's sharing it with people, it's encouraging people to read it and give you good, honest feedback. And indeed, a couple of our previous interviewees, authors, you know, they pointed out that's for a lot of people a big stumbling block, is having, you know, putting your neck on the line, so to speak, and having the public or people that you know even critique your work and tell you what they think.
Yeah. Or even just, you know, writing is a very lonely sort of pursuit, but now with self-publishing, you really have to, you know, be your own salesman, your own editor, your own designer sometimes. You have to put on all these different hats. It's basically like an entrepreneurial thing.
It's your own business, right? Yeah, and that's how we're kind of approaching it too.
Yeah, but it must be very rewarding when you actually do get feedback and you see some success because you kind of built it up yourself. What's something that you wish you had known at this stage that you didn't know when you first started writing and maybe, you know, shopping your book out to literary agents about the publishing experience?
Well, I wish I had known more about the way that, there are publishing trends, right? And so agents are looking for very, very specific things. And a lot of times things from very specific people or types of people, you know. And so if you want to actually go the traditional publishing route, you have to pay really close attention to what's going on in publishing and what they want and all that kind of stuff. And so if what you've written doesn't fit within this exact box of what they want at that point in time, then you're not going to get anywhere.
Right.
You know, so, you know, what you've written may be great, but the industry at that particular point in time is only looking for this specific thing, you know.
Yeah.
So it's a lot more narrow than what you would think it is.
Yeah, which is quite insane to think about, considering all the books being published, whether if it's in the industry or self-published, and how there's so many different ideas and people don't know what's going to really catch on or what readers are going to really actually be interested in, because, you know, you can follow the trends and do all that stuff, but as soon as like some new revelatory piece comes out and then, that's the new trend now of doing this new thing. I also write young adult, and that it changes so much, like since Harry Potter to then Twilight and Hunger Games, like it's, you know, a saturation of different markets. It's really hard to tell.
if you look it up at what specific time and think, oh, this is the trend, I'll write that. Well, by the time you finish that,
yeah.
I know.
Exactly. Yeah. So write what you want to be out in the world is kind of what we've heard from authors, and self-publishing is so great because you can kind of do that and still find like-minded people to read your work, which is really fantastic.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest comfort as well, is that there's always someone out there, a group of people that will like your work.
You just got to find them.
Yeah, exactly. And
basically,
like you pointed out, that's like the biggest, trouble. And speaking to the writing, being a writer or an author being like a lonely thing, I've heard that a lot, and I understand what they mean, because in the moment of writing, you're alone. You should be, at least in my opinion. But there's, now with the internet, we have online communities. I mean, we've met all these authors through the fantasy sci-fi focused Facebook group, and there's just tons of people. Like we have thousands of members in that group, and tons of people that have been published, that are successful, that have a wide readership. Many of them, they have fans that are fans of their work, and then other people's works at the same time, and it's like it's good to know that exists, and authors indeed support one another. They, I think that's another key thing too, is we definitely want to reach out to more authors and just connect with them. And I think it's good because we hear these ideas and we hear these different ways of thinking about the whole venture that this is, and it makes it seem a bit less daunting and kind of scary. I can't imagine being an author in like the early 20th century, for example, where you are alone for a lot of it, except for if you go to salons or writers groups.
A lot of them are alcoholics for a reason.
Yeah,
it's a tough gig.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad that it's becoming somewhat of a more wholesome, I think, thing in general, because it's still art, and art is always, for some reason, a tragic process. I don't know why. You brought up that quote, or that sentiment, which is from our favorite author of all time, which is J.R.R. Tolkien. I can see you have a Lord of the Rings poster behind you.
Oh, yeah.
And you mentioned around the corner you got tons of his books. He was a huge proponent of that idea that you write the novels that you want to read, and then that is what, because you're not performing for somebody and hoping you get the reward. You're doing it for passion. He
was very stubborn about people editing his work and changing things up. So, yeah. Speaking of trendsetters, I guess Tolkien is kind of the grandfather of fantasy.
Almost all of it today, I think.
Modern fantasy.
Almost all of it, yes.
Yeah. So when you first reached out to us, you mentioned that you had watched our Return of the King movie and book review, and you had mentioned that we had missed Peter Jackson's greatest bungle in the movie. So, or making the movie. So we've been dying to know what is this greatest bungle that he made with the movie.
And this is my opinion. So.
Yeah.
I mean, there was when the movies were coming out, there was probably nobody more excited than I was at the time. It's been something I've been waiting for many, many years to see, and we went through years of internet rumors, and most popular one being Sean Connery's going to be Gandalf. And so that was, it went on and on and on. And when it finally happened, went to the midnight showing of Fellowship of the Ring and everything, and I loved it. The first movie was almost perfect. I mean, especially once the extended edition came out and added more, and it was just great.
Yes.
And the Two Towers came out, and not quite as great.
Okay.
I understand changes for movie making and so on, and I didn't like the changes he made to Aragorn's character, but I kind of understood why he did that. I really did not like the changes he made to Faramir. But even then, it was like, okay, the third movie's coming. there are two moments. If he gets those two moments right, then I'll forgive anything. And one of them is the cracks of doom. And so a friend of mine who was a movie reviewer at the time got to see an early screening, and I told him, all I want to know, don't tell me any spoilers, anything, just did get those two moments. And he told me, well, the cracks of doom is different than the book, but it's still good. It works.
Right.
The other one is not really in the movie. Like, what? It's not in the movie? How can that even be possible? And it kind of wasn't. And then in the extended edition, it came back sort of, but even then not really. And that was the scene at the gates of Minas Tirith. I've read The Lord of the Rings, I don't know how many times, maybe 25, 30, something like that. And I've read it out loud 5 times to other people. My brother, my wife, and 3 kids. And any time I read it, when I get to that scene at the gates of Minas Tirith, I choke up.
Mm-hmm.
Because the way it's written is just so powerful. It's such an incredible moment. And in the theatrical version, Jackson left it out completely. It's just Gandalf tells them, whatever comes through the gate, be ready. And it's a bunch of trolls in armor that charge through.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
What's that? It's so dramatic and so beautiful and perfect right there, and he leaves it out. Because in the book, you have Grond, the battering ram, which I think they did fantastic in the movie. It looked great.
I agree too. Yeah, it was sick.
Yeah, it looked spectacular, and it burst through the gates. But in the book, what happens next is the Lord of the Nazgul comes in on a horse, not on his spell beast.
Right.
And I think that's one of the things that Jackson didn't want to do, was have him switch mounts.
Yeah.
He comes in on a horse, and everybody runs away because of his presence, his power, which was intentional, that he was supposed to be this so overwhelmingly powerful being, except for Gandalf sitting there on Shadowfax. And like I said, I can't read it to you because then I would choke up. It's so dramatic. Gandalf confronts him, and the Nazgul Lord is telling him, you failed, this is the end, you're going to die now. And right at that moment, there's a rooster crow. And the way it's written is just so beautiful. I mean, it's dead silence, and then there's a rooster crowing. It's like, because dawn has come. And then the horns of Rohan sound in return. It's like Rohan had come at last. It's like the absolute turning point of everything, And, in the extended edition, he did have a confrontation between the Lord of the Nazgul and Gandalf.
Yeah.
One of the towers, because it's more dramatic, I guess.
Yeah.
The fiery sword, too.
This is my hour. Yeah.
He left out the rooster, which to me is the most dramatic moment in the entire thing. And it's intended to be, and Tolkien talked about it a lot, this concept, and this has to do with some of the other questions we've talked about, the eucatastrophe, the word catastrophe with EU in front of it, the sudden joyous turn, where in a story where everything seems lost, where all hope is gone, and then one thing happens and you realize, whoa, this is fantastic, something great is happening, And he wrote that scene, and when you, I don't know if you've ever looked at the stuff that Christopher Tolkien published, all the stuff that showed how he was writing. To me, it's incredible to go through and look at the process that Tolkien went through. He rewrote that scene over and over and over, and just to get it right. because to him, that was the turning point of everything. When all hope was completely lost. And then the rooster crows, and it's like, what is that? What's the point of that? And getting so dawn is coming, big deal. And then there's the horns. And to me, it's such a dramatic and beautiful moment, and it just annoyed the snot at me that it wasn't in the movies.
Yeah. So I'm so glad that this came up, because I thought at first, Tim, you were going to say the Scouring of the Shire, and I would have had to have disagreed thoroughly, because I'm like, just cinematically just does not does not work.
It's pull off, yeah.
Yeah. But I agree, and I know what you mean, because I recall, I'm going back now in my mind, like as you were telling this, and I was getting like hair standing up, I recalled it's that exact imagery, right? It's the evil being on the dark evil horse, and then Gandalf on Shadowfax, and it's like light and darkness, and then you have the rooster crows, and that's like almost reminiscent of the Shire, or like that homely feeling, right? It's the farm, it's the pastoral existence of the peoples of Middle Earth.
It's what they're fighting for, as Sam says in his little monologue.
Yeah, and the more you go into it, I could spend more time talking about, but the more you go into it, there is a lot more there based on Tolkien's specific word choices that he uses there. And
for sure.
There's a lot of, there's callbacks to things like some things from the King James Version of the Bible, and all kinds of stuff just woven in through there.
Yeah.
And the way that he wrote it, and it's just amazing.
Yeah, that's incredible. It was really profound when you were speaking about the scene, as Morgan said, the hairs on our arms were standing up.
Yeah.
But, it makes me realize that I haven't read Tolkien in a long time, just because I haven't been able to read for pleasure for quite a while, as I'm doing an English master's degree.
Master's student.
Ironically. Don't have time to read. But it just reminds me that the little things in the story are really what matters, and that's what authors put a lot of time into. It's not necessarily the big scenes. Obviously those take a lot of time and thinking as well, but it's those like the pieces of symbolism and showing the words and the dialogue and the meaning and the themes through these little moments is really what strikes at people. Like the rooster representing domesticity and home and what they're fighting for, truly. That's such a beautiful point, and now I just want to go back and read it because I know there's so many things that as a young person reading Tolkien, a lot of my view of Middle Earth is colored by Peter Jackson's movie, because that's what I've grown up with.
Yeah.
I understand that there's such a big generational difference in the fans of Tolkien, because of people like our age will have grown up with it and they think the world of the movies, and then people who are much older who had more time with the books are they have time to sit with those details and really understand what those mean, and I think that's quite meaningful to kind of get back to. I just want to go and read now. Yeah.
There's so much there. It's just like, it's deep, and I think it's the heroism, everything. Yeah, I'm trying to think now as well. Like, when I was reading the books, like doing my first big, cover to cover read through of them all, I was actually an adult. So when I was a kid, I started with Two Towers, because when you're a kid you don't do anything in order, and I skipped ahead to where I was like, there's all this crap about furlongs and miles and valleys and all this descriptive environmental language, and I go, where's like the swords and fire breathing dragons? So I got to Helm's Deep, but reading it as an adult and having the emotional maturity and seeing as well how Tolkien is mirroring, arguably, the things that we have in our real world with war. That's what the whole thing is really about: conflict, And again, the parts that got to me and like that, where I got like emotional was when the characters stood up in the face of those impossible odds. And indeed, they, a lot of them, they don't have magical powers or are necessarily like otherworldly or I mean, Gandalf is, but most of them are not. They're halflings. They're just humans with all of our faculties, and they still manage to overcome it. And I think it shows so much about what the human spirit is, and we can overcome, we shall overcome, sort of thing.
It's actually quite interesting. There's not a lot of magical creatures in Tolkien.
Surprisingly little, at least in terms of who we see the stories.
Who we see in the Lord of the Rings, obviously not the Silmarillion.
Yeah, that's a really cool point. Yeah, so thanks for bringing that up, Tim, because I definitely wouldn't have guessed that was the point, but that's very true.
I actually wanted to ask, as someone who knows deeply about Tolkien and has an understanding of him, why do you think Peter Jackson omitted that? Do you think that he didn't understand what that scene meant, or do you think that he just thought that in terms of dramatic tension it might not work? What do you think was the reason?
I don't fully know. I do think part of it was what I said earlier, the simple fact of we've established him riding on this big giant fell beast, so we don't want him to walk in on a horse.
On a little horse, yeah.
Yeah,
for sure.
It could have been part of it, but even then, I mean, you could have had him come in on the beast, I think.
The doors are big enough.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So I'm not entirely sure why, honestly. He played up the drama of other things, with the dead men and all that kind of stuff more than it was in the books. But
a lot more.
To me, it just, I don't know why he didn't do that, because even, cinematically, it sounds like it would be awesome.
Yeah.
Because, it talks about, the shadow spreading out from Lord of the Nazgul as he rides in, and that's and people running away from it and everything. That, to me, it would have been very, very dramatic. So I don't know what it was, if he didn't want to take away from Theoden's arrival too much, or I just really don't know.
Yeah. My only hunch could be that he wanted to, like, that elicit that emotional response from the audience with the Rohirrim assembling with the sunrise. I think that was it, right? And I think for a lot of people who saw the films, they go, I got choked up when I saw that, because it's just so epic and it's so heroic, and they're there and they're helping, and they're here to give their lives for this cause, right? And I think that's
It could have been even more epic if he had the moment of such darkness just before. Instead, in the theatrical version, you have Gandalf all of a sudden looking out from the castle walls.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the only thing that comes to mind with the rooster sound is the playing of it has to be very specific and well done. Like, it can't just be like a rooster just like randomly showing up, right? Or like just in the background.
Stock rooster sound.
Yeah, it has to be. No, but it has to be, at the right pitch, the right sound. It has to be like, in my mind, it has to be like a faint echo. It's like it's barely in the audience's attention span or width, really, to understand what's going on.
Like but then, subliminal almost.
Yeah, but then when you keep rewatching, or if you're a Tolkien fan, you would understand what that meant. Then that would mean a lot of have a heavy weight to it. I think it's also the version of the version of Tolkien that Peter Jackson presents in the movies is quite different. Like you mentioned epic and heroism. Like that was quite played up, especially as we went further along in the movies.
The crescendos.
Yeah, like that sort of epic feel, and I think it's because he wanted to create those epic movies. But, in the real Tolkien books, it's not really those epic moments that we gravitate towards. It's, the relationships people have and those small symbolic moments, the descriptions of the land. all those kind of things is what draws us to Tolkien, and I think that's where Tolkien put his own emphasis in his writing. But Jackson wanted to do something different, which is, totally his thing. He created the movie series I think that also probably played into it.
Yeah, it's honestly a series that like every year that passes, there's more and more that I'm learning about it and getting out of it. And the more other fantasy that I read, the more I go, wow, like there's just so much that is owed to this one plot. It's not even Tolkien's main story necessarily. I mean, it's most famous. But the Silmarillion and the Unfinished Tales, which were done, edited by his son. Like this world is so much bigger than we even can see. And to be honest, Tim, I a couple of years ago, I was thinking it would be so cool to have a Silmarillion movie or a TV series. And then I see what HBO did with Game of Thrones, and just how much of a disaster it was towards the end, in my opinion, in our opinion. Mm-hmm. And I was like, you know what? Why don't we just leave it as it's his, like, his magnum, it's his book. Mm-hmm. That's it. You read it as an accompaniment to what is already out there in pop culture and appreciate it for what it is. I'm not sure that I want to see them try to represent it, because I think they will make some of those similar mistakes and try to represent the Silmarillion in a way that is really exposition-y and just like it won't capture the depth of it. It's like mythology compared to The Rings, which is really just one little story if you think about it in the continuum of time of his universe.
Yeah.
Amazon's making that series now that's going to be set in the Second Age.
Yeah.
And it's like, could be good, could be horrible, don't know.
It could really go either way, especially these days with TV. I think a few years ago we felt like we were in the golden age of TV, and now it's kind of died off again. Like the series that were riding high during that time, now they kind of ended in really wishy-washy ways. So Game of Thrones is the one I have in mind. So yeah, it could really go either way. But I really think, without trying to get too technical here, I think there's really something to be said about the mental theater of the book. And, we as humans, we place a lot of emphasis on visual things for the most part. But I think there's really a value in, reading and imagining whatever world is in there in your own head. Like, it's such an incredible faculty we all have, and we don't need every book that we love to become movies, because there's always going to be something personal and intrinsic in you reading your own work. I'm doing my master's thesis on mental theater, basically. So like how like our brains, without it's intangible what's in our brains, but we can imagine tangible things in there, and it's kind of an incredible capability we have as humans. So
the passive intake of this, by just watching it is kind of like, it's nice, but you're missing out on like 90% of the magic of reading fantasy, which is using your imagination. That's really...
It's engaging the magic within you, if you want to be cheesy.
Oh, dear.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, God. You can edit that out if you want. I just had to say it. Yeah, I think our final question here to wrap things up, we've kind of discussed this a bit quite throughout. It's been the theme of our interview, but what do you think the purpose of fantasy is in our society, and where do you see yourself and your work and philosophies fitting in with that purpose?
Definitely a big question, so...
Yes. Take your time.
Yeah, when I read it, let me think about this.
Yeah.
It's deep. And and to continue with the theme, one of the things I have to go back to is Tolkien, because he actually wrote about that. His famous essay called On Fairy Stories. And he listed 3 things as the purpose of fantasy or fairy tales. Recovery, escape, and consolation. And this is me paraphrasing him and adding my own thoughts to it, but recovery in the sense that fantasy helps us look at things differently, or more specifically, look at things the way they should be looked at. Things that we get used to, things that we take for granted, especially the world around us,
Yes.
the nature and everything in it. I've always loved the outdoors. I'm stuck in the suburbs, so I don't get to see as much of it as I would like. But I go on bike rides for as far as I can go to, different areas, parks and things where I can just be among trees and things like that. And I love that. And I think a large part of that is due to all the fantasy that I read growing up, because trees and the woods and things like that are always a part of that, and it, a magical part of it. And so it helps us to see those things, as they are, as they should be seen. And that's a big part of what fantasy is about. The other one, escape, is, that's what we all kind of want right now, especially, to get away from COVID-19 and everything, because to escape into another world, to be immersed in that. And, Tolkien, in his essay, talked about how there's a lot of criticism of that you just want to escape from real life, but it's more than that. He says, would you criticize a prisoner for wanting to escape from jail? It helps us re-engage with the world, because it gives us hope. It gives us things like that. And that ties in with the third one, which was consolation. It gives us the things that we really want. He talked about, the happy ending. We want things to turn out right, no matter how bad things are going on in our lives, how horrible the world situation may be. We want to believe there's a happy ending. And that's when he talked again about the eucatastrophe, the joyous moment where things change and all. But it's hope. It's the idea. It's justice. We want to see evil get punished. We see people get away with stuff. And we think, that's not right. That's not right. Stories help us, connect with the way things should be. Even if, and in a sense, taking them into another world filled with magic and different races and everything helps us apply that to our lives more directly than a straight-up novel about real life as it is now. It really does. In some ways, growing up, I think I learned more from Legolas and Gimli about race relations than I did a lot of other stuff.
Very true.
Yeah.
We take it's like you talked earlier about something preaching at us, and those kind of books. If you get in the middle of a book and all of a sudden a character starts spouting a big sermon about something, then it turns you off. You're like, okay, what is
Yeah. Here's the author talking to me now.
Yeah.
Hey, we get it. You believe this, yeah. But we can communicate stuff in a way that, like we said, you've talked about the human condition and all this stuff. The things that the way I put it in my statement was to draw us deeper into life itself. Mm-hmm. Because I once heard a speaker say that bad stories take us out of life, good stories take us deeper into life. Wow. And that's what I really want to see.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh my God. That's going. I have a wall near my desk where I have a whole bunch of inspirational characters, real life people, quotes. That's going up there, like 100%.
Yeah.
Wow.
Incredible. I think...
Like getting chills almost from that. Jeez.
He's reaching a bunch of epiphanies here. Tolkien, he's lauded for his fiction, and his academic writing is not so much well received. Having been in school where I took a fantasy course and we had to read him, and people consistently say like, oh yeah, it's whatever. He wrote some criticism on fantasy and stuff. But he really like laid some foundational work for the stories that we write today, and there's a lot to grapple with there. I think it's also part of why people don't take fantasy as seriously as other literary genres, because they still think that fantasy is an escape from reality, whereas in reality it's bringing us back into what actually holds meaning to us, and reflects back the things that we value and the things that we want to see in the world, such as justice, as you brought up. So yeah, it's really profound, and I hope more people read Tolkien, both his books and also his literary criticism as well, because I found it very enlightening when I was in my undergraduate degree reading that.
Definitely.
It's hard to get because it's used at that point in time.
For sure.
Especially from a school.
Yeah.
But really good stuff.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, Tim, you've 100% have made both of us think a lot more about this author and how his works have been influential, and just about the whole project again of being an author, an indie author at that, and just how writing matters, reading matters, telling stories matters, and again, it all comes down to conversations and people exchanging info and ideas and their passions, and no matter how bad things are on the news, it's like you can always find some sort of refuge in these things, and that's kind of, I think, what keeps us going in a lot of cases. And so I feel a lot of gratitude to you for doing this with us, and this has been a really awesome author interview, like really profound, really, and great. It got at a lot of nice topics. So so just as we're about to wrap up, could you tell us and our listeners where we can find you on social media and the internet, and where they can buy your books?
Okay, my website is timfrankovich.com. Twitter is at Tim Frankovich. I'm really creative here. My books are on Amazon. You can search by my name. I have a Tim Frankovich author page on Facebook. And of course, that's on my website. You can sign up for the mailing list, which is the best way to keep track of what I'm doing, because I tell those people all kinds of stuff. So
awesome.
And there's free short stories and things with that too. So.
Oh,
awesome.
Okay.
That sounds great. And we'll have all the links in the description as well, so people can access those easily. Hopefully we'll get to interview you again soon. We'd love to have you on again. Maybe we can go deeper into dissecting Tolkien's scene with the Witch King and Gandalf and the Rooster as well. We can bring in some literary criticism or something there. We'd love to have you on again. And thank you for coming on. This was really wonderful.
Great.
And on that note, Tim, please stay cool. We'll try to warm up, I guess. Welcome to North America. So, all the best to you. Stay healthy and safe, all the rest. And we'd love to speak with you again. And until then, all the best, sir.
All right, thank you.
Great.
You're welcome. Check out the description of this video, and you can see the different platforms we put our content on, as well as our social media links. Thanks again, and see you next time.